LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to a special Monday edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out 44 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a really interesting show for you today. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I'll also have a bunch of political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, and also from the season finale of Saturday Night Live hosted by Louis C.K. on Saturday night. You can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you should also see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Today's topics include breaking news about ISIS, and both in the raid in Syria, and now it looks like ISIS has taken over Ramadi in Iraq. I'll also have breaking news on the investigation into this train derailment in the Northeast Corridor in the United States, an Amtrak train. Have some coverage of the Republican presidential campaign for 2016. A lot of problems in Jeb Bush's campaign, even though he hasn't officially declared this week. Follow that with a couple clips about the Hillary Clinton campaign, and then several more clips on the Trans-Pacific partnership that has kind of split the Democratic Party between President Obama on one side and Elizabeth Warren on the other, and Hillary Clinton not really taking a side yet. I'll have a couple clips on the Patriot Act that is up for renewal. It expires on June 1st, and some of the fights going on over that. And then I'll have a few quick clips on, just single clips on the topics of race and religion and Islam. But before I get to all those topics, as a point of personal privilege, because I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, I wanted to start with a couple clips of Louis C.K.'s monologue at the beginning of Saturday Night Live. Now, when Chris Rock hosted Saturday Night Live last November, I played a couple clips from his monologue, and I said I thought Chris Rock might be the greatest living stand-up after the death of Robin Williams, but Louis C.K. is definitely a contender. He doesn't quite have the rock star persona that Chris Rock has, no pun intended, but sometimes I think his material is better. Louis C.K. made several interesting choices in his Saturday Night Live monologue, including a routine I won't show about how he's a little bit racist because he grew up in the 70s. That routine was then immediately followed by this joke about the Arab-Israeli conflict from the perspective of someone who, like me, grew up in the 70s, that you can see over in this clip.
This is because I was raised in the 70s. The 70s were a very different time. The 70s, everything was different in the 70s than it is now, except the Middle East is exactly the same. It's exactly the same as it was in the 70s. It's been the same fights, and you know what? It's boring now. That's the worst part of it. When I was a kid, we were like, ugh, but you can't go like this for like 1,000 years. After a while, when you fight, people don't care, because when you're just both, you just keep fighting. Everybody's like, those guys are dicks. They just fight. That's what it's like. You know, like I have 2 kids, and they fight sometimes. And when they first start fighting, I get concerned. I go in their room, I'm like, hey, what's going on? What's wrong? Why are we having some feelings? Can we listen to each other, please? Can we please just listen to each other?
And then that joke goes on to talk about parenting between 2 different children, which I, of course, don't relate to because I only have 1 child, so don't know those sibling rivalry type fights that Louis C.K. analogized to the Arab-Israeli conflict. But I do remember the Arab-Israeli conflict from the 70s and how it's gone on and on and on. And so I kind of like that joke. But the really, the most funny routine I thought was the one he did on child molesters and what child molesters get out of child molesting, which was really edgy. And you could see he was a little worried about how it was going to go. As you'll see, as this is basically the end of his monologue, which I'll talk about after you see that clip here.
I mean, it's so crazy, because when you consider the risk in being a child molester, speaking not of even the damage you're doing, but the risk, there is no worse life available to a human than being a caught child molester. And yet they still do it, which you can only really surmise that it must be really good. I mean, from their point of view, not ours, but from their point of view, it must be amazing for them to risk so much. How do you think I feel? It's my last show, probably. Because Look, I can't key into it because I love Mounds bars. I love Mounds bars. It's my favorite thing, right? But there's a limit. I mean, I can't even eat a Mounds bar and do something else at the same time. That's how much I love them. Like, if I'm eating a Mounds bar, I can't read the paper like, I have to just sit there with it in my mouth and go, why is this so good? I love this so much. And because they are delicious. And yet, if somebody said to me, if you eat another Mounds bar, you'll go to jail and everybody will hate you, I would stop eating them. Because they do taste delicious, but they don't taste as good as a young boy does and shouldn't. To a child molester, not to me, not to us, because we're all awesome.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just sick in some way in that I like jokes that sort of skirt the edge of good taste there, and maybe I'm a little desensitized to the issue of child molesters, having been a public defender for several years and actually having represented several people accused or convicted of child molesting. But I'm open to stand-up comedians looking at those really sensitive, taboo topics, and apparently there's already some controversy about his monologue, both the race part I didn't show and the child molesting part I did show, and you can let me know what you think about that down in the comment section. I really enjoy Louis C.K.'s comedy, and so I'm not going to criticize him for the jokes that he made, but you can let me know what you think. Now I want to move on to the real news topics. The first one I want to cover is ISIS and Syria and Iraq. The big news on the Sunday morning shows yesterday had to do with this successful or supposedly successful raid of Delta Force commandos going into Syria to try to capture and then ended up killing this ISIS financier. There's a lot of different interpretations of how this went. There were some people on the Sunday morning shows who were saying that this might have been an intelligence failure. They thought other people were going to be there, that he might not have been the real target. His name is Abu Sayyaf, and some people have called him like the ISIS accountant. But I'm going to start off by showing you how the different networks all covered this raid, and they also talked a little bit about what was going on in Iraq with Ramadi. And since the Sunday morning shows, apparently ISIS has taken over the town of Ramadi in Iraq, and you'll see that sort of hinted at in several of these stories. So I'm going to show you, let's see, I'm going to start with the coverage from ABC's Terry Moran, then I'll go to NBC, CNN, and Fox News, 4 of the 5 networks covering this. Here's how Terry Moran covered the raid against ISIS and the other things going on with ISIS in the news over here.
It certainly was. Good morning, George. It was high-risk operation sending these American troops deep into the heart of ISIS-controlled territory in Syria. But the president decided the intelligence was good enough, the target valuable enough, and Delta Force troops lethal enough to roll the dice here. The daring raid happened overnight Friday. Elite Delta Force troops taking off from Iraq aboard Black Hawk helicopters and V-22 Ospreys headed deep into Syria. Their mission, capture and interrogate Abu Sayyaf, ISIS's top money man, in charge of their multi-million-dollar black market oil and gas sales. Former Special Forces officer Jim Gavrilis.
This is not just another person. Their revenue streams are extremely important for their survival.
A counterterrorism official tells ABC News Sayyaf is also believed to be the ISIS leader who had been given American hostage Kayla Mueller, killed in Syria in February, as a forced bride or slave. The question on many minds after thousands of airstrikes on ISIS targets, why risk a dangerous ground operation?
We really did want to capture him. There's no question about that. He could have given us a lot of information about their whole financial structure, about all their oil smuggling.
But fate would have otherwise. On the ground at Sayyaf's house, a fierce firefight. ISIS fighters defending the building, using women and children as human shields, the Pentagon says. At times, the combat's so close, commanders using their training in hand-to-hand fighting.
So it happens in close quarters battles more frequently than you think. They'll even duck under your rifle. And when they duck under your rifle, then you have to get into hand-to-hand combat.
Abu Sayyaf killed in the firefight. Sayyaf's wife captured and held for questioning. And an apparent slave freed. All American personnel returned safely after scooping up laptop computers that could prove to be an intelligence windfall. The raid comes as ISIS has been making gains in recent weeks on the battlefield, especially in the key Iraqi city of Ramadi. But what happened to Abu Sayyaf this weekend? Well, it sends an unmistakable message to ISIS leaders. U.S. intelligence is improving, and they are not safe anywhere. George?
So Terry Moran talks about the unmistakable message this raid is supposed to send, but it seems almost like that's the message the U.S. military wants to send to ISIS and to the world. And what I was rating the different news reports on is how faithfully they carried the message of the military without doing any critical thinking or bringing in any other viewpoints. I thought ABC, they did a little bit about the risk involved, but it was still, daring raid and pretty much giving the information just that they got from the Pentagon. I think over on NBC's Meet the Press, there was this report from Chuck Todd, starting with Chuck Todd and then handing it over to Richard Engel, where they did a little bit more criticism or analysis as to who this guy was, why no one had ever heard of Abu Sayyaf before this raid. And you also saw at the end of that Terry Moran piece, they talked a little bit about what's going on in Ramadi, and Ramadi actually fell, like I said, to ISIS, or at least temporarily to ISIS, since the Sunday morning news programs, and it may be that this was preemptive news to be counter news to what happened in Ramadi. Who knows? But I'm going to show, here's the NBC Meet the Press clip, Chuck Todd to Richard Engel, giving a little bit more critical coverage to the Pentagon line on this here.
A fierce battle is raging right now for the Iraqi city of Ramadi, capital of that country's biggest province, between Iraqi government troops and ISIS, as the terror group continues to make advances despite 11 months of U.S.-led airstrikes. But this weekend, the U.S. has been heralding a blow against ISIS, announcing the killing of an ISIS commander and the capture of his wife in a special forces mission in eastern Syria. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, has been assessing the significance of this raid into Syria.
ISIS has gotten used to fighting U.S. troops when they attack from the air. For months, Washington has led an air war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. But this was very different. A bold raid into Syria, into an ISIS stronghold with U.S. boots on the ground. U.S. officials say American Delta Force commandos took off from northern Iraq in Black Hawk helicopters and Osprey plane helicopter hybrids like these, and flew deep into ISIS territory in eastern Syria, into Deir ez-Zor. It was Friday evening Syrian time. No allies on the ground. If U.S. forces were captured, they risked unthinkable horrors. A Jordanian pilot captured by ISIS was burned alive in a cage. U.S. officials say the Americans' target, Abu Sayyaf, was a top ISIS money man who managed ISIS's oil and gas income and was personally close to the ISIS leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
And the fact that the United States was willing to mount a capture mission to grab him shows that he was a really important person in the infrastructure itself.
The target did not go quietly. There was a gunfight, even hand-to-hand fighting. Abu Sayyaf was killed along with a dozen or more ISIS fighters.
You can kill a lot of fighters in ISIS, but if you take out the money man, it really can dent the organization's capability to do things.
The U.S. commandos left, under fire but unharmed, taking with them Abu Sayyaf's wife, known as Sayyaf. U.S. officials allege she helped manage hostages taken by ISIS. The Delta forces also freed an ethnic Yazidi woman held by the couple as a slave. It was a bold and risky operation and could yield intelligence, but it is unlikely to change the course of the war on ISIS. This week, the group attacked the center of the Iraqi city of Ramadi with car bombs and took control of a government compound. ISIS is also fighting its way into the historic Syrian city of Palmyra, threatening to destroy it, the way it has razed other historic treasures. But this week, it was Washington that took the initiative, going into the ISIS heartland and making it out alive.
Joining me now live.
Now, I guess actually that Richard Engel piece didn't really criticize the military Pentagon line so much. The one reason I thought it was a little better than the ABC News clip was because it both started and ended with what was going on in Ramadi, which is also a big story. In fact, probably a bigger story than what happened in Syria, though, U.S. ground troops, Delta Force, I guess, are sort of ground troops, going into Syria to do this capture kill raid. That is news, but it seems like it's not as big a victory as the loss of Ramadi is a loss. And the NBC report there focused a little more on what was going on in Ramadi, which turned out to be also a big story after the Sunday shows, like I said. It's actually this CNN report that focuses a little more on how no one knows who Abu Sayyaf was, or none of the experts had even heard of Abu Sayyaf before this raid, and whether that means that he was even the target of the raid, or if this is some like after-the-fact success put out by the Pentagon. That's on CNN State of the Union, was guest hosted by Brianna Keilar, I think her name is, and she's talking to CNN reporter Nick Patton-Walsh and doing a little more critical analysis over here.
From Washington, I'm Brianna Keilar, and right now U.S. officials are analyzing a treasure trove of new information about how ISIS operates. This after a daring raid by American special ops in Syria that left a top ISIS commander dead and his wife captured. CNN's Nick Patton-Walsh is in Beirut with the latest on this. So, Nick, what do we know about this commander who's known as Abu Sayyaf?
Very little, frankly, until the news was broken yesterday of his death in that raid. Now, this is a man who is said to have been at one point running the lucrative oil industry that ISIS had in northern Iraq, is said to have been a key man in terms of the shipment of money around and potentially increasingly involved in military operations. But we really only have the US's word for that. We don't have, for example, many of the key ISIS experts we normally talk to knowing much about this man at all. Some say he was often an associate of the ISIS spokesman Mohammed al-Adnani. One is offering a name, Nabil al-Sadiq Abu Saleh al-Jaburi. That's not confirmed independently. He was caught in that building with his wife and killed as he resisted. But you have to bear in mind, Brianna, this was an extraordinarily high-risk move. 20 Delta forces at the White House order breaking through 2 defensive lines into a multi-story building, fistfights, blood on the knuckles, Barbara Starr reported yesterday, of some of these commandos. An extraordinarily high-risk maneuver that could have gone very badly wrong. Yes, they retrieved laptops here, but there are many questions, Brianna, being asked about exactly who this man was and how come very few apart from the US had heard about him. Entirely plausible they kept his identity and his real name still now a secret, but many questions being asked, Brianna.
Are there any details about the raid that tell us perhaps his importance is greater than perhaps the fact that experts don't know a lot about him will tell us?
Well, the fact that they were willing to take this extraordinarily high-risk intervention into Syrian territory, right into the lion's den, really, here. The Alamar oil field where this raid happened, heavily fortified, a 3 to 5 kilometre security perimeter around it. A lot of violence inside there when they landed, softened up, say, witnesses in the area by airstrikes beforehand. Over 30 dead ISIS militants in this attack. No US casualties that we're aware of right now. I have to say, given how little information was known about Abu Sayyaf before this particular raid, there is the possibility they may have hoped somebody else was there. I have to say it's on the far end of probability that they expected to really capture him alive. This was initially a capture mission, US officials say, because ISIS leadership, they worship death, frankly. It's unlikely they'd just surrender and hand themselves over. They now have his wife and his laptops, but on the balance of it all, you're seeing a very high-risk maneuver here, a rare thing, frankly, that either signifies a whole new era in US Special Forces operations against ISIS leadership, like we saw in Afghanistan, for example, where night by night by night, what they used to call the night janitors would go out and take out key middlemen to make the command structure almost impossible to keep going, or they're after something else that we don't know about at the moment. Brianna?
All right, Nick.
So, yeah, I like that report the best of all the 4 I'm going to show because I thought it was most critical. It brought up the question as to whether this guy was even really the target. It did make this argument that I think is kind of backwards, that because it was such a high-risk operation, that must mean he's a high-value target. It could mean someone else more high-value was the target, although I'll show a Democratic congressman deny that in just a minute. But first I want to show how Fox News covered it, and it's not that much different from the way ABC and NBC covered it, but it is pretty much the straight military line. They even have their Fox News contributing general who is basically a mouthpiece for the military now, working for Fox News and the media, included in the report. This is Catherine Herridge talking about how this was a treasure trove, and I think she even downplays Ramadi in this clip, if I remember correctly. I guess we'll see after we both watch it here.
Intelligence gathered from the raid is described this morning as a treasure trove of information, including cell phones, laptop computers, and documents that reveal how the ISIS network communicates and earns money to finance its operations in Iraq and Syria. We are learning new details about the raid itself, with a defense official telling Fox News some of the fighting which took place in eastern Syria was at times hand-to-hand combat. In fact, women and children were used as human shields after Delta Force operators entered the target zone and ISIS militants defended the multi-story complex. The target of the operation, Commander Abu Sayyaf, is a shadowy figure who was the terror group's chief financial officer, responsible for the black market sale of oil and gas. His wife Sayyaf was captured and may have intelligence on the remaining Western hostages. Abu Sayyaf was a high-value target because he had increasingly taken on a military role and was believed to be close to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. The newly recovered intelligence may bring the U.S. closer to Baghdadi's kill or capture.
This will be a setback for ISIS. It won't stop their military operations per se, but the mission was largely what we refer to as a capture-kill mission. The purpose is intelligence.
The president is grateful, a White House spokeswoman said in a statement, to the brave U.S. personnel who carried out this complex mission, as well as the Iraqi authorities, for their support of the operation and for the use of their facilities, which contributed to its success. And this morning, Iraq has sent reinforcements to the key gateway city of Ramadi after ISIS militants seized the main government compound there. Chris.
Catherine, thank you.
So I guess they didn't downplay it, but they emphasized in the Ramadi story there that Iraqi security forces had sent troops when actually Iraqi security forces pulled out troops soon after the Sunday morning shows aired, and it looks like ISIS is now in control of Ramadi. The next clip I want to show goes back to CNN State of the Union. It is a good question, I think, from the guest host, Breonna Keeler. She's talking to a Democratic Congressperson, Adam Schiff, and she directly asks him, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, if Abu Sayyaf was the original target, because he was briefed on the raid beforehand, so he should know if they switched it around. And he directly denies that there was any change, or that Abu Sayyaf was not the original target over in this clip.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with me. Congressman Schiff, to you first. You heard Nick's reporting there. So many experts on ISIS aren't even particularly, they don't know Abu Sayyaf all that well. It leads to the question of whether this is really who the Delta Force was going after. You were briefed, I believe, before this happened, before this operation happened. What were you told about the objective, and was this the guy they were trying to get?
Well, this is the guy that we were trying to get, but nonetheless, I think these are very important questions, and that is the only reason to take this kind of risk, and it was a very daring operation in the heart of ISIS-controlled territory, is either you can't launch a military strike from aircraft because of the risk of civilian casualties, or you think the intelligence value of what you're going to gain is sufficient to merit that kind of risk. Now, obviously, we had very good intelligence here. You can't do an operation like this without knowing that your target is there, what kind of security they have, what the premises looks like, and enough to know you have a backup plan if things go wrong. So our intelligence was good, but nonetheless, this was an extraordinary risk. If one of our people were captured, if we lost some of our special forces, there'd be tough questions to answer about whether it was worth it. And I think, notwithstanding the success of this operation, we still are going to have to ask those questions. Was the intelligence value that we hope to gain, and the fact that we are gaining, worth this kind of risk? I don't think it signals a wholesale effort to mount lots of special operations efforts like we had in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't think this is a major escalation, but it is a striking and risky success, and hats off to those that were involved.
Okay, so...
So I thought that was really interesting, both because Representative Adam Schiff directly denied this speculation that I saw from several analysts on the shows that maybe Abu Sayyaf wasn't the original target, that he was the target touted in the press releases afterwards when the people who they thought might be there weren't there. But Adam Schiff says he was the original target. And then that was kind of interesting, saying that even though it was successful, it was still too risky. And, you know, we should look into whether it's worth the risk to go into Syria with Delta Force troops for this kind of payoff. But And he's the only one I saw who questioned the risk of a successful raid. That, I guess, in a way, that's shows someone who's really willing to be a deep thinker on these issues, that you're willing to question the risk of a success. And I had said that I thought Breonna Keeler did a good job asking that question of Adam Schiff. The question she asked of the Republican, the Representative Zinke, who was a former Navy SEAL, was much more of a softball, basically mentioning that he was a former Navy SEAL and asking for his assessment. Although then she did a follow-up on Ramadi, which, even though it was also kind of a softball, ended up being very topical because Ramadi was taken over by ISIS soon after this broadcast. And you can see that clip over here.
Congressman Schiff saying there, Congressman Zinke, that this doesn't signal perhaps a whole new era in how to approach ISIS in Syria, in Iraq. How do you see it as a former SEAL team commander at SEAL Team 6?
Well, first of all, Bravo, Zulu, Delta. You know, they're outstanding individuals, and this was a great operation. This is not the first time that we've been in Syria, and likely not the last time we'll be there. It doesn't change the overall background. We have no plan in Syria what to do overall. You have Ramadi on fire. You have in the eastern part of Iraq, you have Iranian forces, senior military leadership. I'm not sure how we're going to ever remove them from the territory of Iraq. And this is going to be an enormous problem for the president as well as the next president. What to do in Iraq, our policy of doing it from afar, especially in the territory of Iraq by air operations alone, is not working. It won't work. The Kurds are isolated, and the Sunnis now seem disenfranchised.
You served in Ramadi, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
I did. Fallujah and Ramadi. And
so what is it like looking at, depending on the hour, you're hearing Iraqi security forces having the upper hand over ISIS, but it's this back and forth that is going on.
Well, Ramadi's a fairly large city, about 900,000. It is enormously difficult in interior to do operations. They left the headquarters, and I think the headquarters more or less is symbolic. It doesn't lead to a greater plan of what to do about retaking Ramadi as a whole. When you have a script where it says we're just going to do air operations alone within the territory of Iraq, what happens is the forces then that we want to target will move their forces to co-locate with hospitals, schools, embed themselves to be very, very difficult to conduct air operations against. But this is what happens when you don't have an intelligence background, when you don't have embedded troops that can judge what targets are in, what targets are out. In the case of Syria, it was an isolated case. He was not in the top 10. So it's not going to change the tide and the stem of what's going on in Syria or Iraq or the Middle East. But it is enormously helpful, I think, and I applaud the administration for going after this individual and looking at operations in the future.
So that's one Republican, former Navy SEAL's perspective. You notice he did sort of put some criticism of the Obama administration's lack of plan into his answer about this successful raid. That's sort of par for the course for Republicans, I guess. I'm going to show one more Republican who I hadn't seen before, and he's the new chair of the House Intelligence Committee. His name is Devin Nunes. And here I'm going to use him, this clip, to see this description of Abu Sayyaf as the ISIS accountant. And he describes that and some more about the raid over in this clip.
Talk a little bit about this raid that took place over the weekend. U.S. Special Forces went into Syria, apparently killed a fairly significant ISIS leader, got out without any Americans being killed. Flesh it out for us. What do you know?
Well, many of us have been advocating this strategy for a long time, or using this tactic, because it's just a better way to gather intelligence versus just airstrikes. So it takes guts for the administration and our military to put a action like this together. It was successful. We're happy that they got back safely. Now, over the coming weeks, we'll know what they were actually able to gather there.
I hear they may have gotten computers, phones. How significant would that be?
Well, this target was known as the accountant for ISIS. So hopefully, one would assume there would be a lot of intelligence at his hideout.
He was the one, as I understand it, who was brokering sales of oil.
And so you would want to know what he's doing, because you would want to know how they're bringing in money, moving money, and then spreading it out to the organization.
So yeah, that's the description of the ISIS accountant. And I even saw a pundit, I can't remember which one, compared Abu Sayyaf to Al Capone's accountant. And then, you know, like a lot of us remember that from the Untouchables movie, where they got the accountant, and that was like a big step towards getting Al Capone, which would make you think that the fact that the accountant ended up dead instead of captured means it's not really a successful raid. But you wouldn't know that from listening to the answer of my U.S. Senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, Democrat, though just barely a Democrat, and she's pretty hawkish on these types of matters. And you can see her being a cheerleader for the military, calling this a picture-perfect raid, even as she admits that they did not capture the guy they went there to capture. This is on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking to George Stephanopoulos here.
Senior Democrat Dianne Feinstein, the Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee. Senator Feinstein, thank you for joining us this morning. You just heard Senator McConnell on that raid inside Syria this weekend. Your assessment?
Well, my assessment is that it was a success. It is the kind of 1-2 punch that we should do more of. I believe that if we're not going to put troops on the ground, then we've got to use our special operations forces to go in and collect intelligence, also be able to capture people that might be able to be helpful. This is the second time this has been tried in Syria. The first time it was not successful. That was to rescue hostages. But now this was, I think, a picture-perfect raid. Everything went according to plan. But the demise of the principal obviously took place when the aim was to capture, as I understand it. But I'm very worried about the Islamic State. It is now in at least 12 countries around North Africa, around the Middle East. It is organized. It is an impressive fighting force. It occupies territory. It runs a government. And most importantly, it is evil.
Yeah, most importantly, it is evil. Well, I mean, there are a lot of things that are evil. It doesn't make them a huge threat to the homeland or national security. And I think that position is a little bit too hawkish on ISIS, and I wanted to show a Democrat espousing the same hawkish position you see from Republicans, even though I showed Adam Schiff questioning the risks involved in this raid. But those are all the clips on ISIS and Syria and Ramadi, which, like I said, was a breaking story after the Sunday morning news programs yesterday. But I want to get to another breaking news story. So there was this train derailment, as most of you probably know, in the Northeast Corridor here in the United States. An Amtrak train derailed and going too fast around a curve, and 8 people died. And it was a really big story, got a lot of coverage. And I actually thought Bill Maher, in his discussion, this is a really short clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where Bill explains why it was a big story over here.
Talk about the train wreck. First of all, it wouldn't be that big a story. It is a big story. But if this happened in Chattanooga, believe me, it just happened on the Eastern Corridor. It's like when there's a snowstorm anywhere between New York and Washington, it's the biggest thing in the world. Okay, let's talk about it.
So yeah, I think there's definitely some merit to that argument from Bill Maher. Things like snowstorms and train wrecks that happen near New York or Washington, D.C. get a lot of coverage. If it happened in Chattanooga or, God forbid, somewhere in the third world, you have all these stories about ferries and all these boats in the Mediterranean now, people who are leaving North Africa. That gets very little coverage, but if it happens, in between New York and Washington, D.C., it's going to get a lot of coverage. And I'm going to show some of that coverage now. The first clip I want to show is an overall review of what happened from ABC News reporter David Curley on This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday over in this clip.
What happened in the last moments of Amtrak 188? The train quickly accelerated in its last minute, barreling down the tracks north of Philadelphia at more than twice the speed for a corner ahead, captured on this security footage obtained by our station WPVI. Moments later, a flash as the train careened off the tracks. And now an account of some kind of projectile hitting the windshield. The story from an assistant conductor listening to her engineer, 32-year-old Brandon Bostian, on the radio.
She also believed that she heard her engineer say something about his train being struck by something.
The FBI has been asked to join the investigation to examine the damage to the train's windshield and reports of other trains in that area being struck at about the same time.
An unknown object made contact with that train, shattering the windshield.
But even if the Amtrak train was hit by something before derailing, that explained the sudden acceleration. 10 minutes out of Philadelphia, it's at the speed limit, 70 miles an hour. Then in the final minute, a quick acceleration, 80 miles an hour, then 90. Just 16 seconds before derailment, more than 100 miles an hour. Reaching that 50-mile-an-hour curve, the brakes are applied, but it's too late. The engineer tells investigators he has no memory of the moments before the crash or the crash itself, which killed 8 and injured hundreds and shut down part of the busiest rail corridor in the country. Before reopening, the Federal Railroad Administration is ordering Amtrak to take some immediate safety precautions, requiring all trains be outfitted with onboard speed control technology and calling for inspections of curved tracks and increased speed limit signage on the Northeast Corridor. But this part of the corridor doesn't have the newest technology that can actually stop a speeding train. CEO Joseph Boardman now promises that technology.
By the end of this year, when you have positive train control in here, it will not happen again.
When you heard that this train was 106 miles an hour in a 50-mile limit, what did you think?
There's a sickening in my stomach.
That high-tech positive train control system is supposed to be on all American rails and trains by the end of this year, but the railroads and the rail lines say they won't meet that deadline. They're asking for an extension to 2020. George?
Okay, David, thank
you. Well, that's not good news, and the fact that there is an infrastructure angle to the story created this whole political thing going on in Washington, D.C. about the train derailment this week. First, Democrats attacked Republicans for cutting funding to Amtrak right after the crash and pointed to the possible infrastructure problems that may have caused this and the overwork of the engineer possibly. And then the Republicans said that Democrats were politicizing this unfairly, especially on Fox News. I saw a lot of coverage of how this was really the fault of the engineer and had nothing to do with infrastructure. And so I'm going to show a couple clips on that. First, this is also from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Democratic Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey was on, and George Stephanopoulos, let me make sure I have this right. Oh, I'm sorry. This is actually on NBC's Meet the Press. Senator Cory Booker was asked a question about the infrastructure and whether it was politicizing everything. This is Chuck Todd asking the question over in this clip.
Move to the Amtrak derailment. This week some House Republicans have been criticizing some Democrats, not you by name, but other Democrats, for attempting to politicize this derailment. Do you think that's a fair critique?
Well, look, I think it's a distraction from the reality. The United States of America is falling behind dramatically its global peers in terms of the quality of its infrastructure. We have trillions of dollars of an infrastructure debt right now, and the accident that we saw happen, which the NTSB says could have been prevented should we have had positive train control. We should not be scrimping on investments in public safety. But what's even more important to understand this, as China invests about 9% of their GDP in infrastructure, Japan 6%, Europe 5%, America's only doing 1.5%. By withholding this investment in what America used to dominate the globe in, the #1 infrastructure globally, now out of the top 10, depending on who you look at, number 12 or 18th, we are losing economic competitiveness. We are losing out on jobs. We are missing out on growth. So let's leave that partisan argument aside for a second and just say the fiscally conservative thing to do right now is to invest in your, whether it's a company in your physical plant, whether a homeowner in your roof. But as a nation, we have fallen way out of pace with where we were in previous years in terms of overall investment.
But do you
So that's one Democratic Senator, Cory Booker from New Jersey, making the argument about infrastructure over on Meet the Press. And you can see a similar argument, especially focusing on this positive train control system that hasn't yet been installed, from the Democratic Senator from Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, talking to Bob Schieffer over on Face the Nation this morning over here.
Do you think, Senator, that something should have been done that wasn't done, and that's why we had this accident, or was it just simply this train was speeding?
Well, Bob, I think we've got to wait for the results of the investigation to be certain, but the little information we do know about speed and about the nature of the curve and the basic facts that are on the record right now, I think indicate that we've got to make sure that as Mr. Sumwalt just said, that we have positive train control in place. So if you're a member of Congress, as I am, and the law says, as it does, that by the end of the year, positive train control has to be implemented and deployed, we have to make sure that we do everything possible to support Amtrak in completing that assignment.
Well, explain
to it.
To those who may not know, what is positive train control? What does that mean?
It's a good question. It's a technology that allows the train engineer, if he or she is not slowing the train down appropriately, it can override that human error if the train's moving too fast. It's among other things sensors and technology that allows that train to slow down when it should and to comply with the speed regulations, in addition to sensing other problems on the track. So it's remarkably effective technology. We got to make sure that it's on every mile of the track.
Do you think Amtrak has done enough to ensure passenger safety, or are there things that need to be done here?
Well, I think an incident like this causes us to question a lot of things once we have the facts. And as you know, NTSB will be providing more facts in a preliminary report, and then down the road, maybe as long as a year, a full-scale report. We have to make sure that the Congress reacts appropriately to that. The Congress should not put Amtrak in the position of choosing between positive train control safety and fixing crumbling bridges. We have to do both, and we've got to make sure they have the resources to do that. We don't know the connection between funding and this incident, but regardless, Amtrak needs more funding. I've been advocating for years, and at a minimum, I think we should fund what the president proposed as opposed to what was done the other day in the House Appropriations Committee.
So I think that is a reasonable argument. He, like you just saw, he didn't specifically connect this incident to a lack of funding, but said that it's a warning sign of some of the infrastructure issues that exist. I thought it was a little strange that he pawned off the decision as to whether funding was an issue in this case on the National Transportation Safety Board, and he mentioned Robert Sumwalt, who was on just about all the shows, I think. And I'm going to show a few clips of it. Robert Sumwalt, who's the head of the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, that's investigating this. In this first clip, he says basically that they're not going to wade into that political issue. He tries to stay out of all the political conclusions, even though Senator Bob Casey in that last clip seemed to think that they were going to get answers from the NTSB on this. But anyway, here is what Robert Sumwalt said also on Face the Nation on CBS yesterday morning here.
Do you think that this in any way is connected with Amtrak being underfunded?
Well, we're certainly not going to get at that at the NTSB, getting into that political fray, but we will say that we have long called for positive train control, and we believe that positive train control, if installed and operational, it would have prevented this accident.
Well, why wasn't it?
Well, that's a question that we intend to find out. Of course, it's not required to be installed by the end of the year, but we do want to know what the management decisions were at Amtrak, which those decisions were to install positive train control in certain parts of that track, but not in others.
All right. Well,
so at least there he is saying that they will look at the decisions that management made, but he's not really going to talk about decisions that Congress made and the whole political controversy between the Democrats and the Republicans. Then in this next clip, this is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Wait, let me make sure I have this right. No, sorry, this is over on CNN's State of the Union talking to Breonna Keeler. He says that he talks about the interview with the engineer and what they know about the engineer and his lack of memory. and I'll talk about that a little more if you see it here.
You've been getting cooperation from the conductor of the train. What have you been able to learn from him?
And to be clear, we've talked to the engineer, the person operating the train. So he was fully cooperative when we met with him on Friday. And then we've also interviewed 2 assistant conductors that were on the train.
But he doesn't remember anything, or this is the report. He says he doesn't remember anything after leaving North Philadelphia. Is that right?
That's right.
So what does that mean for this investigation? Where do you go from here? And is there any hope that perhaps he will be able to recall? He does have a concussion, as we understand it. Where do you get those facts if he doesn't recall them?
And you know, we have called for inward-facing video cameras. We called for that after a fatal accident out in California that killed 25 people. We want inward-facing cameras, and we've called for that, and we want that to happen.
Robert Sumwalt with the...
So Robert Sumwalt talks about the need for cameras. It kind of reminds me of the whole police issue where they want the body cameras, and I guess there's also a union that has tried to stop the inward-facing cameras that record what the engineers are doing at all times. And one of the interesting facts that's come out in the last couple days on this is the possibility that something hit the windshield of the train, and I'm going to show 2 more clips on the train derailment, and that's it. This first one is the last one from Robert Sumwalt, where he's over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and he specifically answers a question about the projectile and says that some of the evidence that points to a possible projectile, there's a conductor who supposedly overheard the engineer talking on the radio about it, that there's no recording of any radio conversation to back that up. And I think he ends going back to the need for inward-facing cameras over in this clip.
NTSB's lead investigator, Robert Sumwalt, he joins us right now. And thank you for joining us, Mr. Sumwalt. What more can you tell us about this idea that a projectile might have hit the train and what it might have done?
George, thanks for having us. And, you know, this idea of something striking the train, that's one of the many things that we're looking at right now. We interviewed the Amtrak... Well, let's see. We interviewed the dispatchers, and we listened to the dispatch tape, and we heard no communications at all from the Amtrak engineer to the dispatch center to say that something had struck his train.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all that he reported to the dispatch center.
So this is just, as you say, one theory, nothing reported early on. You've spoken now with the engineer. He's remembered so little. So you're any closer to figuring out the cause of the crash?
Well, we're at this stage, George, we're just in the fact-finding stage of the investigation. I will say this, that we've called for inward-facing video cameras for a long time, and we feel that had we had cameras, that would help to help with this investigation significantly.
But have you been able to...
So you heard the head of the NTSB there, Robert Sumwalt, say that this projectile theory is just one of many theories, and they still haven't come to any conclusions, and they're pretty open-minded on what happened, which makes this last clip I'm going to show on the Amtrak train derailment a little weird. I don't quite understand what happened in this clip. I just happened to be watching Melissa Harris Perry's show on MSNBC Sunday morning, and they had on this reporter Adam Reese talking about this projectile theory because there were a couple of other trains around the same time that were also hit by projectiles, or it's not even clear that the Amtrak train was hit by a projectile. They're still looking at the windshield and deciding whether it was the derailment that caused this shatter pattern or whether it was actually something that hit the train. But in this report from Adam Reese on MSNBC, I don't know if it's a wording problem or what's going on, but if you watch the clip, you'll see he says that a projectile is responsible for killing the 8 people who died in the train derailment. And I don't know why he would say that, because that is not, I mean, maybe that will end up being the conclusion, but it's definitely prematurely reported on MSNBC in the final train clip I want to show you on the show today here.
Slow it down. I also want to tell you about the FBI investigation looking into a pattern. Is there a link between 3 trains getting hit by projectiles? Let's look at them. First, we had the Acela at 9:05 Tuesday night. Then the SEPTA train claiming it was hit at 9:10. And then, of course, Amtrak 188 at 9:28. NTSB officials say it was a fist-sized projectile that went through the front windshield, killing 8 people. It's possible criminal charges could come from this investigation. Now, engineers along this route call it getting rocked, actually happening so often along the northeast quarter, they have to protect themselves with putting grills in the front windshield. Melissa?
So I heard that getting rocked thing on several different reports, but that's the only place I ever heard anyone say that a fist-sized projectile went through the windshield, killing 8 people. Look at the clip yourself. I don't know if that was like why he reported it that way, but that was obviously untrue. And that's the last clip I want to show on the Amtrak train derailment, but there was sort of this other train wreck in the news this last week, so I'm going to start with Bill Maher talking about that train wreck as the transition to the next topic over here.
But now everybody this week is talking about one of the worst train wrecks ever. But enough about the Jeb Bush campaign. We learned something this week. There's actually no such thing as a smart Bush. They kept saying he was the smart... No. Oh, I think only a Bush could answer a yes or no question 2 different ways and be wrong both times. I mean, it wasn't that hard. He was asked, knowing what we know now, would you have invaded Iraq? And he had a different answer every day. First, it was damn right I would. Absolutely. Fucking great idea. And then the next day it was, sorry, what? I'm sorry, I misheard or I misinterpreted. And then the next day it was, well, that's hypothetical. I can't answer. When did a politician ever answer a hypothetical question? And then finally it was, okay, my brother's a giant fuck up. You happy? You know. Every day a different answer, which is how he got his nickname, the Undecided.
So yeah, it was a really bad week for potential presidential candidate Jeb Bush, who had 5 different answers to the question, if you knew then what we know now about the invasion of Iraq, would you still have invaded the country? And I'm going to show some more newsy coverage of that in just a minute. I think from NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd showed like all 5 different answers, and I'll show that in a minute. But first I want to show how it was covered on Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update. The first 2 jokes were about Jeb Bush's problem, which shows why it broke through into that much media, I guess, even though it's the 2016 presidential campaign, which obviously doesn't get a lot of coverage in the mainstream media at this point. Here's how Saturday Night Live covered it on Saturday night. Weekend Update over here.
Jeb Bush said in an interview this week that, like his brother, he would have authorized the invasion of Iraq, though he wouldn't have done it for the same reason George did, to capture the genie from Aladdin. Jeb Bush was also criticized at a town hall event in Nevada when a college student said that his brother George W. Bush created ISIS. But that's really not fair, you know? It's more like he co-created it. And if you don't believe me, take a look at the credits.
Halliburton.
So I thought that second joke was definitely funnier than the first joke, but I show it not necessarily because they're so hilarious, but because they show how Jeb Bush's problems have broken into the mainstream media, and to show you the extent of the problems, first I'm actually going to show you a report from Jonathan Karl over on ABC. This was yesterday morning on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, reporting on Jeb Bush's really bad week over in this clip.
On the campaign trail in Iowa yesterday, Jeb Bush took new heat over his brother George W. Bush's record on Iraq.
The facts that were there for the president was grounded on faulty intelligence. But the power of hindsight's not given to us.
That response comes after Bush gave 5 answers in 4 days to this basic question.
Knowing what we know now, would you have authorized the invasion?
Next day, Bush said he misheard the question.
Whatever I heard, it was translated, knowing what you knew then, what would you do?
While Bush was clarifying, his Republican rivals rushed forward to show they have no problem answering the question.
If we knew then what we know now, and I were the president of the United States, I wouldn't have gone to war.
No way we would have gone to war with Iraq.
I think even at the time, invading Iraq was a mistake.
Also piling on Saturday Night Live.
Jeb Bush said in an interview this week that, like his brother, he would have authorized the invasion of Iraq, though he wouldn't have done it for the same reason George did, to capture the genie from Aladdin.
By the end of the week, Bush finally came up with his direct answer.
Knowing what we know now, what would you have done? I would have not engaged. I would not have gone into Iraq.
Even before this stumble, Iraq threatened to cast a long shadow over Jeb Bush's campaign. The most unpopular decision of his brother's presidency. Criticizing family, he said this week, is something he has a hard time doing.
I'm not going to go out of my way to say that, my brother did this wrong or my dad did this wrong. It's just not going to happen.
But this week's Iraq drama raises questions for Bush, not just about the war, but also about his readiness for the rough and tumble of a presidential campaign before he's even entered the race. For this week, Jonathan Karl, ABC News.
So that was a pretty good report, I thought, from ABC. Jonathan Karl covered it generally and showed especially how Republicans, all the Republican candidates, pounced on Jeb Bush on his inability to answer this question. And I'm going to show how NBC's Meet the Press covered it, and they really delineated the 5 different answers a lot more clearly. But first I'm going to show a shorter clip from NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd talked about this Iowa Lincoln dinner that it seems like every week there's another Republican event that all the candidates go to. I think he may have even said that in the introduction to a few of the clips from the Iowa Lincoln dinner, Republican candidates over here.
Saturday doesn't go by without Republican hopefuls gathering somewhere. Yesterday, they gathered in Des Moines, Iowa at the Iowa Republican Party's Lincoln dinner. 11 Republican hopefuls were there. And once again, the candidates focused on foreign policy, not social issues. Here's a sampling.
If I'm president of the United States and you're thinking about joining Al-Qaeda or ISIL, anybody thinking about that? I'm not going to call a judge, I'm going to call a drone, and we will kill you.
Well, I got news for you, Mr. President. Once and for all, we need a commander-in-chief who calls it what it is, and that is radical Islamic terrorism is a threat to us all.
Many of you all know me as George and Barbara's boy, for which I'm proud. Some of you may know that W is my brother. I'm proud of that, too. Whether people don't like that or not, they're just going to have to get used to it.
Jeb Bush acknowledging his rough week there. Perhaps he had the most on the line, and he's still trying to untangle his many answers on Iraq. We'll have that story coming up next.
So, as Chuck Todd previewed there, they did this longer story on Jeb Bush's troubles. The reporter, I think this may have come from Chuck Todd. Yeah, Chuck Todd did the report himself, talking about Jeb Bush's 5 different answers and really delineating them in a better way, I thought, that even ABC did over in this clip.
It's possible that months from now, after Jeb Bush officially announces his candidacy, after he lets us know that he's outraised every competitor and is perhaps then leading in the polls, we'll look back at this dreadful week for him and say, remember when we thought that was relevant? But for now, it is relevant. And he's answering a lot of questions about his inability to answer a very simple one. Were we right to invade Iraq?
Welcome to Iowa, Governor.
Arriving in Iowa for his second visit this year, Jeb Bush was still trying to put a bruising week behind him.
We're all going to make mistakes. If you're looking for a perfect candidate, he probably existed 2,000 years ago.
But hoping to launch a campaign focused on the future, Jeb Bush has been stuck reminding voters that he's a throwback to the past, bungling what can only be called an obvious question over 4 painful days. Monday, answer number 1.
On the subject of Iraq, obviously very controversial, knowing what we know now, would you have authorized the invasion?
I would have, and so would have Hillary Clinton, just to remind everybody, and so would have almost everybody that was confronted with the intelligence they got.
After universal criticism, Bush went on conservative radio to do cleanup, saying he'd misinterpreted Kelly's question. So Tuesday came answer number 2.
In 2020 hindsight, you would make a different decision.
Yeah, I don't know what that decision would have been. That's a hypothetical.
But that didn't work. And as the week went on, the answers just kept on coming.
Going back in time and talking about hypothetical, what would have happened, what could have happened. Of course, given the power of looking back and having that, of course, anybody would have made different decisions. There's no denying that.
Finally, the full retraction. Thursday, with answer number 5.
If we're all supposed to answer hypothetical questions, knowing what we know now, what would you have done? I would have not engaged. I would not have gone into Iraq.
Bush has been slammed by conservatives.
You can't still think that going into Iraq now, as a sane human being, was the right thing to do.
Lampooned by late night.
When people ask you about Iraq, just be honest and say it's weird to talk about it because George is your bro.
And enthusiastically corrected by potential 2016 rivals, suddenly eager themselves to repudiate the war.
There's no way we would have gone to war with Iraq.
If we knew then what we know now, and I were the president of the United States, I wouldn't have gone to war.
His brother even said in his own book that he would have done something differently. I don't know how that was a hard question.
All of these Republicans eager to remind voters of Jeb's last name and force him to lug around George W. Bush's unpopular Iraq baggage.
Now, not only did I like that NBC report a little better than the one from ABC, because I thought it delineated the statements a little better, but I thought there was another potential gaffe from Jeb Bush near the beginning of that clip. If you go back and watch, he has that one-liner about how if you're looking for a perfect candidate, he probably existed 2,000 years ago. The way he worded it, it sounded like he was saying that Jesus only probably existed. I think that was probably just a bad wording on his part, but that could be a big gaffe for the Republican right-wing evangelicals, which are such a big factor, especially in the early primaries. Anyway, I want to move on to the way that other Republicans on the Sunday morning shows actually reacted to what Jeb Bush did. First, I'm going to stay with NBC's Meet the Press and show Chuck Todd asking Senator Rand Paul about what Jeb Bush said, and you can see first that he's not really satisfied with Jeb Bush's answer, but he throws in a zinger against Hillary Clinton for what happened in Libya. He kind of equates Libya, the decisions in Libya and the decisions in Iraq, and what's kind of an interesting argument, I guess, not the regular Republican argument over here.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Let me start with the issue that got brought up by Governor, essentially by some with Governor Bush this week, and it's the war in Iraq. Are you satisfied after Governor Bush's sort of fourth answer on this, saying that he wouldn't have gone into the war in Iraq knowing what we know now? Are you satisfied now that Governor Bush won't be taking us back to the Bush foreign policy? You had said that that was an important litmus test for him.
Well, I think it's an important question, and I don't think it's a historical anecdote. I don't think it's something that's a hypothetical question. I think it's a recurring question in the Middle East. Is it a good idea to topple secular dictators, and what happens when we do? I think when Hussein was toppled, we got chaos. We still have chaos in Iraq. I think it emboldened Iran. I think we now have the rise of radical Islam in Iraq as well. But I think the same question, to be fair, ought to be asked of Hillary Clinton if she ever takes questions. They should ask her, was it a good idea to invade Libya? Did that make us less safe? Did it make it more chaotic? Did it allow radical Islam and ISIS to grow stronger? So I think the war in Iraq is a good question and still a current question, but so is the question of should we have gone into Libya?
Now, I'm not really sure I buy the analogy between what happened in Iraq and what happened in Libya, but at least it's not your usual Republican argument justifying the war in Iraq, various different ways, even though so many of the Republican candidates pounced on Jeb Bush this last week for what he said. They said in hindsight they wouldn't have invaded Iraq, but that doesn't mean that they were attacking Bush or even saying that he made a mistake. As I'll show, Marco Rubio wouldn't say that George Bush made a mistake later in an interview that he did. But before I get to that, I want to show how Senator Rand Paul responded to something Marco Rubio said in justifying the Iraq war, saying we're better off without Saddam. That's another argument you often hear from Republicans, and Senator Rand Paul wouldn't even buy that one. He said, saying we would have been better off with Saddam isn't the way he would word it, but he did basically say that we're more at risk because Saddam was deposed over in this clip.
Senator Marco Rubio, in being asked the same question about Iraq, gave this answer. He says, presidents don't have the benefit of hindsight, and the fact of the matter is the world is a better place because Saddam Hussein is not around. You're sort of implying that you disagree with that. Do you believe the world would be a better place if Saddam Hussein were still the strong man in Iraq?
I don't think that's exactly how I'd put it, but I would say that I think that we are more at risk for attack from people who are training, organizing, and fighting in Iraq than we were before. So, for example, ISIS is more of an aberration than even Hussein was. So you have this radical brand of jihad, this radical brand of Islam that is now strong and growing stronger because of sort of the failed state that Iraq is. You have the same thing going on in Libya. So this is a valid debate, and we're going to have this debate not only in the Republican primary, but in the general, as to whether or not it's a good idea. Is intervention always a good idea, or sometimes does it lead to unintended consequences?
You laid out in your book very clearly.
So some people have said that Senator Rand Paul has become more hawkish since he started running for president, so that he'd be more willing to get votes in Republican primaries where people are much more hawkish. But as you can see in that clip, even if he is more hawkish and more interventionist than he used to be, he's still one of the few people in the Republican Party you hear making the kind of argument that he made there, that there's a cost to intervening and deposing, and that we should look at those costs before going ahead. And I'm going to get to Marco Rubio in a minute, but I want to show another Republican contender. Some people say even the front runner, Governor Scott Walker from Wisconsin. He takes this same question or a similar question on CBS's Face the Nation, and he doesn't go as far in attacking the Iraq War, basically saying, knowing what we know now, it was a mistake, but knowing what they knew then, not a mistake. Or you can see Scott Walker explain it himself here.
Jeb Bush, and you just heard what Secretary Gates said. He was a governor, but he had kind of a hard time, it seems to me, answering that question of would he have gone into Iraq had he known what we all now know. And he gave about 4 different answers by the end of the week. He said, well, no, he wouldn't have. What do you have to say about that? Did that surprise you?
I tend to agree with what I tend to agree with Secretary Gates. We should really be talking about the challenges we face going forward. But I did stand up and defend the president, President Bush, that is, saying I think any president, regardless of party, probably would have made a similar decision to what President Bush did at the time with the information he had available. Remember, even Secretary of State, then Senator Clinton, voted for measures supporting the Iraq War. I think it was a failure in many cases in the intelligence that was given to the president, to the Congress at the time. Knowing what we know now, I think it's safe for many of us, myself included, to say we probably wouldn't have taken that tack. But I give credit to the president for recognizing the challenges, for being responsible for the surge, listening to those in Congress who were pushing for that. That was highly successful. And I also think it's important to learn from the fact that this president and the advisors he had, like Secretary Clinton, I think made a mistake by urging the country to pull back from our stand in Iraq, and we have a place that's largely destabilized now because of their quick move in the last few years to get out of Iraq. That's something we need to learn from going forward. We have a very destabilized region, and we need to have a strong presence there.
So that's more what I would expect from a mainstream Republican who is more defensive of what George W. Bush did and puts more of the onus on leaving Iraq too soon, but is also willing to say that knowing what we know now, we shouldn't have invaded Iraq. And now I'm going to show Marco Rubio trying to answer that question from Bob Schieffer. And I think he had his own little Jeb Bush moment there. He's, I guess, Jeb Bush's political protege. They're both from Florida, and now they're running against each other. That came up in this interview in a clip I'm not going to show. This is from Fox News Sunday, and there were, you can see Chris Wallace kind of got him running around in circles, because his basic problem here is that he's saying that knowing what we know now, we shouldn't have invaded Iraq, but invading Iraq wasn't a mistake. Like, because what he's really trying to say is because he didn't know what we know now. But the thing is, it was a mistake, even if it was like a justifiable mistake because of the intelligence, which is definitely debatable, did not get debated enough on the Sunday shows, I don't think. But here's Marco Rubio chasing his tail and having his own problem answering the same question that Jeb Bush got asked, and on Fox News, just like Jeb Bush, Fox News Sunday talking to Chris Wallace yesterday morning here.
This brings us back to Iraq and the question of the week, which is, given what we know now, would you have invaded Iraq back in 2003? As we all know, Jeb Bush had a tough time answering that this week. Here's what you've had to say.
Was it a mistake to go to war in Iraq?
No, I don't believe it was. The world is a better place because Saddam Hussein doesn't run Iraq.
After finding out there were no weapons of mass destruction, would you, if you knew that, have been in favor of the Iraqi invasion?
Well, not only would I not have been in favor of it, President Bush would not have been in favor of it. And he said so.
Senator, isn't that a flip? 6 weeks ago, it made sense to invade Iraq in 2003. Now you say it was a mistake.
No, they're two different questions. It was not a mistake. The president, based on, this is the way the real world works, the president, based on the information that was provided
But she was saying based on the information.
No, but look, there's
She was saying based on what we know now.
Well, based on what we know now, a lot of things. Based on what we know now, I wouldn't have, thought Manny Pacquiao was going to beat in that fight a couple of weeks ago.
You were asked the same question, and you said it made sense.
No, it was not the same question. The question was whether it was a mistake, and my answer was it's not a mistake. I still say it was not a mistake because the president was presented with intelligence that said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. It was governed by a man who had committed atrocities in the past with weapons of mass destruction.
But what she asked you was it a mistake to go to war with Iraq?
It was not a mistake given the fact that what the president knew at the time.
No, she didn't say that. She just said, was it a mistake?
That's not the same question. The question I was asked is what you know now. Well, based on what we know now, I think everyone agrees.
Was it a mistake? Was it a mistake to go to war with Iraq?
I'm
asking you to.
Yeah, I understand, but it's not the same question.
But that's the question I'm asking you. Was it a mistake to go to?
It was not a mistake for the president to decide to go into Iraq because at the time he was told.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you.
In hindsight. Yes. Well, the world is a better place because Saddam Hussein is not there.
So was it
I wouldn't characterize it. But I don't understand the question you're asking.
I'm asking you, knowing everything, as we sit here in 2015.
But that's not the way presidents don't. A president cannot make a decision on what someone might know in the future.
But that's what I'm asking you. Was it a mistake?
It was not a mistake for the president to go into Iraq based on the information he was provided as president. Today, we know if the president had known that there were no weapons of mass destruction at the time, you still would have had to deal with Saddam Hussein, but the process would have been different. I doubt very seriously that the president would have gotten, for example, congressional approval to move forward with an invasion had they known there were no weapons of mass destruction. That does not mean he made the wrong decision. Because at the time he was presented with intelligence
I understand that
said there are weapons of mass destruction. He wasn't dealing with a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He was dealing with Saddam Hussein, and he made the right decision based on the information he had at that time. We've learned subsequently that that information was wrong, and my answer was, well, if at the time it would have been apparent that the intelligence was wrong, I don't think George Bush would have moved forward on the invasion, and he certainly wouldn't have had congressional approval. But presidents don't have the benefit of hindsight. You have to make difficult decisions based on the information that's before you at that moment.
Now, I don't really buy Senator Marco Rubio's answer there because he's saying that if you know something now that you didn't know then that changes what you would have done, that means you couldn't have made a mistake. And he used the Pacquiao fight as a Holyfield fight as an example. But think about it. He's saying, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have bet on Pacquiao or whatever. Did he say bet? He may have said bet. But that means betting on Pacquiao was a mistake, right? That doesn't mean it wasn't a mistake that, now he had the shoulder injury or whatever the new information people didn't have then. That means if you bet on Pacquiao, it was a mistake, even though it may have been justifiable because there was information you didn't know. So that was a really weak answer, I thought. You can let me know what you think. I'm going to show a few more clips from that same Marco Rubio interview on Fox News Sunday. This is a little bit better answer from Marco Rubio, at least I think for the Republican primaries, though it's sort of a circular argument, I think, as to why he backed off on immigration reform, or at least, he's saying the votes aren't there, but, the votes were never there unless he helped get the votes, and, well, I'll talk about it a little more if you see him talk about why he flip-flopped on it. Oh, you know what? The immigration clip is after this next clip where I think he also didn't really answer Chris Wallace's question. This was another good confrontational question from Chris Wallace for Marco Rubio. As you know, one of his big platforms is that he has he's the young generation and has ideas for the new century, but he doesn't really have any new ideas. I think I've seen that in the comment section of some of my videos talking about Marco Rubio in the past, like the week that he announced. Well, here's Chris Wallace trying to get him to say what his new ideas are. And he doesn't say in foreign policy, you'll notice in the first question, even though that's the excuse that Marco Rubio uses at the end over here.
You're running for president on a platform of generational change. And in your announcement statement, you said this.
Too many of our leaders and their ideas are stuck in the 20th century.
Senator, what are your 21st century ideas?
Well, a couple. First of all, we have to recognize that the balance of power in the world has shifted. Now you have a number of different challenges to our foreign policy. You have autocratic governments in Russia and China that are beginning to use their power to try to make their neighbors subservient. You have the rise of rogue states like North Korea and Iran, two countries that either have or have designs on weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, that make them immune from international pressure, but also increase, in the case of Iran, their global, or their control of the Middle East. And then you have non-state actors, both transnational criminal groups and then groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and others who pose a threat not just in the Middle East but to the homeland. These are all very different threats, and they require an American foreign policy that can reflect, that can address all of them within the context of the belief that America needs to be the strongest country in the world.
But just generally, on foreign policy, you favor the same approach as Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. On domestic policy, you favor spending cuts and tax reform and fewer regulations. Not to say that any of that is wrong, but it's not new.
Well, you asked about foreign policy in particular. On the foreign policy, the threats are different. And we don't have the Soviet Union like Ronald Reagan had. We have multiple different threats, all of whom on their own, for example, create the need for more cybersecurity or intelligence gaps. On the economics,
where are your ideas new?
Well, first of all, the ideas are new on the global competitiveness front. We need to be, when Ronald Reagan cut taxes, he did so because the top rate was in the 80s, 90s. Today, we need to cut rates to keep pace with global competition. On the other thing we talk a lot about is 21st century skills. We have an outdated higher education system that is not equipping, that is leaving many Americans behind, that is not equipping them with the 21st century skills they need for 21st century jobs. So we don't have enough vocational training. We don't have enough flexibility in higher education for people that have to work full time to go back to school and acquire a degree. We graduate too many young people with degrees that do not lead to jobs and a mountain of student loan debt. So that's why I've proposed solutions to each one of these challenges.
He's proposed solutions, but are they new ideas? I didn't hear any new ideas, and he claimed that the first question about new ideas was on foreign policy, which it wasn't. Like I said, if you go back and look at the original question, there was nothing about foreign policy. It followed a question about foreign policy, but there was nothing in the actual question about foreign policy. He did not do that great a job. I appreciate my live viewers who have been watching this, even though it's a strange time. I've been reading along some of the comments. I noticed the Norwegian 76 said, Rubio needs a sip of water, he'll be fine, referring to the famous sipping of water by Marco Rubio in his response to the State of the Union. In honor of that, I'll do my own little sip. And in fact, you know, on Fox News Sunday, in a clip I'm not going to show, Chris Wallace actually played him taking that sip of water during the State of the Union as part of a question about whether he's too young and inexperienced to be president or to be the presidential candidate. I don't know if that was an example of inexperience, but I think those last two answers from Marco Rubio were pretty bad. This next answer on his flip-flop on immigration I thought was a little better, as I said when I almost played it before, at least better in terms of how it will play with primary voters, Republican primary voters, although you can tell me what you think after you see that clip here.
Perhaps the biggest issue that you're going to have to face in this campaign is immigration. Mm-hmm. Back in 2013, you were one of the authors of the comprehensive immigration plan, which included a tough border enforcement, crackdown on employers, but also a path to citizenship. Right. Here's what you said back then about the 11 million people in this country illegally.
Those who once had no hope will give their kids the chance at a life they always wanted for themselves. Here in America, generations of unfulfilled dreams will finally come to pass.
But after it passed the Senate and ran into trouble in the House, you bailed on comprehensive immigration reform. How come?
Well, I didn't. It's not that we bailed, it's that we don't have the votes to pass it. In fact, we have less votes for comprehensive immigration reform today than we did 2 years ago when that passed, because of the last election, because of unilateral actions the president took through executive order, because of a border crisis, because of minors. So I still believe we need to do immigration reform. I still talk about that on the campaign trail. I outlined it in my book, American Dreams. The problem is we can't do it in one big piece of legislation. The votes aren't there, and the more time we follow that path, the more time we're wasting to address it.
But aren't leaders supposed to shape public opinion rather than just follow it? I mean, shouldn't you have campaigned for this? I remember when you came into Fox back in 2013, and you made a very articulate and compelling case for comprehensive reform.
Right.
Why not stand by it and fight for it?
We did, but the problem is the votes aren't there in the House. In fact, and as you know, for example, the majority leader of the House partially lost his election on the perception that he was in favor of immigration reform, and that impacted the way others voted as well. So clearly, leaders stand for the idea that you need to do something, but you also have to deal with the reality that in the political process, people are going to vote based on what they're hearing from their constituents and others. And that's what I'm basically saying, is the votes are not there for comprehensive immigration reform. And at this stage, after 2 illegal executive orders, after a migratory crisis on the border with minors last summer, the context in which we're having this debate is much different. If we want to move forward on immigration, the first thing we're going to have to do is prove to the American people that future illegal immigration is under control.
So, like I said, I think that he has some good talking points there to smooth over the fact that he once was in favor of comprehensive immigration reform when he's in the Republican debates. It kind of, I mean, it sounds good. I don't think he really found a way to get rid of the conflict between being a leader and listening to your constituents when they vote people out who don't do what you were trying to lead them to do. That you know, listening to your constituents and leading your constituents in that case are kind of separate things if he really believed in comprehensive immigration reform. And I think he's actually left himself a little bit of room to pivot to be more in favor of comprehensive immigration reform in the general election if he can get by the primary voters. And some people say that he's still one of the top contenders. I don't know. You can let me know what you think. I'm actually going to show one more clip, since I showed several tougher questions from Chris Wallace to Marco Rubio. I didn't want to finish this segment and the whole Republican topic. This is the last clip on the Republican Party politics from this last week. I didn't want to finish all that without showing some of the incredible softballs that Chris Wallace used in his interview with Marco Rubio, especially talking about his book and his family background and experience, you know, how he's like living the American dream. And I think the ultimate softball on Fox News has got to be something saying you like helped your grandpa when he fell down and recognized all the sacrifices of your grandparents, because of course, you know, grandma and grandpa are the core viewership of Fox News Sunday. And so here's Chris Wallace trying to make Marco Rubio look good to Fox News's core viewership over in this clip.
You, in the book, talk about when you were 13 years old, your grandfather fell, and you were in the ambulance with him, and that you made him a promise.
Yeah, well, actually, it was when he was passing away already at the hospital. All my life, he had told me to study, and partially because I think he always wished he had had a college degree or the equivalent thereof. It's something they really valued, because coming from where they did, having an education was something that was reserved for the wealthy. But what he really meant was not just study. What he meant was, you know, maximize the opportunities you're going to have. You're going to have a chance to do things I never had a chance to do. Don't blow it. And I wanted him to know that I would.
And so what'd you say?
I said I would. I said, I'm going to study, I promise you. That I'm going to, and what I meant by that is I'm going to make sure that the chances that I have that you didn't have, whatever it is in life I try to do, I'm going to maximize it, because I want to make sure that you know that your sacrifices and your hard work was not in vain.
Senator Rubio, always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
Safe travel.
So, yeah, that was a huge softball, you know, talking about how he stayed with his grandfather after he fell and eventually died in the hospital, and recognized his sacrifices and fulfilled his promise to grandpa. That, I mean, could that be a bigger softball, especially with the core viewership of Fox News, as I was saying? But that's the last clip on the Republican side. So I have a bunch of clips on the Democratic side, although only a couple of them are specifically about Hillary Clinton. Most of them are about the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is kind of splitting the Democratic Party in this last week, and even led to a little bit of a revolt of Democratic senators this last week. But before I get to that, I want to show a couple quick clips about Hillary's campaign specifically. First, somewhere in the comment section early on, I saw someone saying, oh no Bernie Sanders this week. I couldn't find it during that last clip. I was searching for it. But I do have a clip of Bernie Sanders. That's the first clip I'm going to show, is from CNN State of the Union. Brianna Keilar had an interview of Bernie Sanders where a couple times she tried to get him to say that he was going to have a hard edge in his attacks on Hillary Clinton, but he said he wouldn't do it, and he made this challenge to the media that I'll talk about after I show you that clip. Here.
I just wonder, is this going to be a civil debate with Hillary Clinton? And I ask that because many critics will say you have to, even if you're talking about issues and not personality or the fact that she's establishment, you have to go after a leading candidate with a hard edge. Are you prepared to do that?
Well, Brianna, let me turn it around to you, okay? I've never run a negative political ad in my life. People of Vermont know that I've run in many, many campaigns because I don't believe in ugly 30-second ads. I believe in serious debates on serious issues. I've known Hillary Clinton for 25 years. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I like Hillary Clinton. I respect Hillary Clinton. Will the media, among others, allow us to have a civil debate on civil issues, or is the only way you're going to get media attention by ripping apart somebody else? I certainly hope that's not the case.
Trade a big issue this week in the Senate.
I'm going to get to the trade in a minute, but I'm not going to show the Bernie Sanders clip on trade, but I did want to show that clip because there was actually a repeat of that same exchange later in the interview, and you can click on the CNN State of the Union link down in the video description if you want to see the entire Bernie Sanders interview. But he said he was not going to do personal attacks, he wouldn't do negative ads, and he challenged the media to have like a serious discussion about issues of poverty and income inequality. And I don't know, if the media takes up that challenge, that could be interesting, but I won't be holding my breath to see a deep discussion of income inequality during the presidential primaries without Bernie Sanders doing something to get attention himself. A lot of media outlets I've seen have kind of discounted Bernie Sanders because he has so little chance of winning that they don't even really talk about him or his issues. But before I move on to the issue of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there was one more story about the Hillary Clinton campaign. Remember the whole Clinton Cash book about donations to the Clinton Foundation that I covered in the last couple weeks? Well, it came out that George Stephanopoulos donated $75,000 to the Clinton Foundation, which, isn't that big a deal in that it's a charity, and he explains that it had a charitable purpose. But when he was talking to the author of Clinton Cash, he definitely should have revealed that to the viewers or let us know about that. I don't know what he was thinking, but here's his apology on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday morning. Here.
Well, also headaches for Democrats this week, fighting among themselves over President Obama's free trade plan. It is getting...
Oops, sorry. That's the next clip I'm going to show you about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Here's George Stephanopoulos' apology.
Now I want to address some news you may have seen about me. Over the last several years, I've made substantial donations to dozens of charities, including the Clinton Global Foundation. Those donations were a matter of public record, but I should have made additional disclosures on air when we covered the foundation. And I now believe that directing personal donations to that foundation was a mistake. Even though I made them strictly to support work done to stop the spread of AIDS, help children, and protect the environment in poor countries, I should have gone the extra mile to avoid even the appearance of a conflict. I apologize to all of you for failing to do that. We'll be right back.
So that's actually the second apology that he's made there. He made an apology earlier in the week on Good Morning America, and you can let me know if you think that that apology is sufficient and whether it should affect his... Apparently he's not going to do some Republican debate that ABC... He's not going to moderate a debate, but I don't know whether it should affect his coverage of the Clintons or not. I mean, on the one hand, he should have disclosed it. On the other hand, he's actually been pretty tough I've been watching it, not his Good Morning America stuff, but This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I watch it every week, and I think that he's been fairly tough on Democrats and on the Clintons. And I think they tried to be particularly tough on the Clintons this last week, including in the next clip I'm going to show. So this is the beginning of the Trans-Pacific Partnership coverage that is the topic down in the video description. And it's going to start with this overview from Cecilia Vega, ABC reporter Cecilia Vega, who's actually the reporter who's supposed to cover Hillary Clinton. And you can see first the George Stephanopoulos introduction, and then her coverage over here.
You just heard Senator McConnell there. Some scrambled coalitions on this issue. A lot of Democrats. Also headaches for Democrats this week, fighting among themselves over President Obama's free trade plan. It is getting bitter and personal, with just about everyone choosing sides except Hillary Clinton. ABC's Cecilia Vega reports on her big hedge.
An embarrassing political defeat handed down by his own party.
The motion is not agreed to.
President Obama's 12-country free trade deal, initially blocked by Senate Democrats, a resounding setback, some calling it downright open rebellion.
What we've just witnessed here is the Democratic Senate shut down the opportunity to debate the top economic priority of the Democratic President of the United States.
2 days later, Obama did clear a key legislative hurdle, and a Senate vote on the trade deal will now happen this week, though the president is still struggling to gain support in both houses.
The fight is not over.
We can't keep pushing through trade deals that benefit multinational companies at the expense of workers.
But there is more than Obama's legacy on the line. There is an election, with more voices, Republicans and Democrats joining the chorus asking, where's Hillary Clinton? As the nation's top diplomat, she spearheaded the administration's pivot to Asia and praised the Trans-Pacific Partnership abroad.
The idea is to create a new high standard for multilateral free trade. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which will lower trade barriers, raise labor and environmental standards, and drive growth across the region.
But so far, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton remains non-committal.
Well, any trade deal has to produce jobs and raise wages and increase prosperity and protect our security.
Progressive leaders are hoping for more.
I believe that Hillary Clinton cares about working people. It would be helpful if she were more definitive on the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
And it's not just the trade deal. Clinton also coming under fire this week for not taking questions from reporters on the campaign trail. By our count, George, she has answered just 9 so far since launching her bid.
Pressure is building for a press conference. The campaign did late on Friday release some eye-popping speaking fees.
She did in these campaign finances reports, and we have those numbers for you. She declared that she and her husband, Bill Clinton, have earned more than $25 million since 2014, delivering more than 100 paid speeches, $5 million more for the former Secretary of State in book royalties. That puts the Clinton in the top 0.1% of all Americans, making Hillary Clinton the second wealthiest presidential candidate, George, behind Republican Carly Fiorina.
And you're heading to Iowa with her?
So what do you think? Do you think that emphasis on Hillary Clinton being in the top 0.1% and the richest candidate outside of Carly Fiorina, was that ABC trying to show that they were going to be tough on the Clintons despite George Stephanopoulos' history with them and his donations to the Clinton Foundation? I thought, like I said, I have thought watching George Stephanopoulos that he's one of the more biased towards the right in the terms of the questioning. Sometimes I think he's getting some of his questions from people at Fox News, some of the coverage I've seen over the years from him. So I don't know if he overcompensates for his Democratic background, but I really haven't seen him be unfair in his questioning of bias towards Democrats in his questioning. That's my opinion. You can let me know what you think, but I just haven't seen it. And then I want to show this next clip is George Stephanopoulos showing that the people on that Mitch McConnell is kind of strangely on the side of President Obama and some Democrats, but against Elizabeth Warren, and who knows which side Hillary Clinton's going to end up being. But here's the Mitch McConnell part of the story and an interview with Mitch McConnell where he talks about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Let me make sure I click on the right clip here. Yeah, and this is sort of a softball question from George Stephanopoulos to Mitch McConnell over here.
I'd like to thank the president, too. No, you're not hearing things. President Obama has done his country a service by taking on his base and pushing back on some of the more ridiculous rhetoric we've heard.
And there is the Senate Majority Leader this Thursday, Mitch McConnell. He joins us live right now. Mr. Leader, thank you for joining us this morning. This is the president's top legislative priority right now, this Trade Promotion Authority. You appear to be his point man in the Senate. What's it going to take to get it passed, and are you confident it will?
Yeah, we'll pass it. We'll pass it later this week. The president's done an excellent job on this. I point out to my members who are somewhat squeamish, as you can imagine, by giving the president a power on any issue, given his expansive view of his powers on so many other issues, that this is a trade promotion authority not just for President Obama, but for the next president as well. This is a 6-year trade promotion authority bill that will give the next president an opportunity to enter into additional trade agreements with other countries around the world. We know America is a big winner when we lower barriers to our products abroad. It also has a foreign policy and defense component. A lot of the countries in Asia are a little apprehensive, as you can imagine, about not only Chinese economic domination, but potential Chinese military domination. And so they would like to get closer to us. And this is a great opportunity to do that, as well as to benefit America and to create more jobs here in our country.
I saw that little
So that was Mitch McConnell, the leader of the U.S. Senate, explaining why he's in favor of getting this Trans-Pacific Partnership passed, or the fast-track trade promotion authority for the president to finish negotiating this and then get an up or down vote from the Congress. But I don't want to leave the impression that it's just Republicans. Here's my Democratic senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, giving an extended answer as to why she's in favor of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if everything she said were true here, I might actually be on her side in principle. You know, I'm on the side of free trade in principle, as I've said during past shows, but the more and more I learn about this deal, it doesn't sound like it's a deal that is really fair trade, and it's more for corporations than for workers. And she says that's not true. I'm just not sure I believe it. Over in this clip.
You just heard Senator McConnell. There are some scrambled coalitions on this issue, a lot of Democrats opposing the president. Do you agree with Senator McConnell that the trade bill is going to pass, and do you support it?
I do support the trade bill, and I'll tell you why. I'm a born and raised Californian on the rim of the largest trading basin in the world. Nothing is going to decrease the trade between countries along the Pacific Ocean. It surpassed the Atlantic several years ago. Therefore, the kind of trade, free trade, the ability to have enforcement mechanisms to prevent anti-dumping, to protect copyright, to prevent forced labor, child labor, is very important. And that's what this will do. The enforcement section and the trade assistance section, which passed the Senate with more than 70 votes, is vital to this. I think with the three combined, there is a very good bill. I want to straighten one thing out, and that is that most people think this is a bill for corporate America. In California, 95% of the trade is carried out by companies and businesses of less than 500 people. So this is economically upwardly mobile jobs for people, and I think it is extraordinarily important that the trade authority be given to the president. I also think there's a macro reason, and that is America loses its leadership in this very stimulating and increasing theater of trade.
Let me ask you another
if it does
question
not participate.
about it.
Now, if there's a real reason that this is such a strong issue for President Obama, I think it has to do with what Senator Dianne Feinstein said at the end there about leadership in the Pacific region, because this is a partnership between the United States and a variety of countries around the Pacific Rim, not including China. This is sort of a rivalry with China. China has its own new financial instrument. I think it's called the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, that is competing with the United States World Bank to try to give money to support infrastructure in Asia with looser guidelines for like environmental and labor standards. And that's one of the issues here, is whether the United States or China is going to take leadership. And that argument actually has some sway with me. But this idea that the enforcement is going to be good for workers, I don't think that's really been true in the past. And it sounds a lot like what a Republican would say, and you can actually hear a Republican say that over on CNN State of the Union. Breonna Keeler had an interview with Republican Representative Paul Ryan, former vice presidential candidate and chair of the is it the House Ways and Means Committee? He's like the chief Republican on budget, and he claims that there is good enforcement, but I don't believe it. We're in this clip.
Your position is that there are a number of parameters that President Obama will have to adhere to as he uses this quote-unquote fast-track authority to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But you have critics like Elizabeth Warren, like labor unions, and they say that really some of the parameters are toothless. They look at other trade agreements like NAFTA, and they say there aren't any sanctions or fines that are put in place when you're talking about labor violations by other countries that are parts of these trade agreements. What do you say to them to assuage those concerns?
These are old trade agreements from, last century. This is different in that this requires other countries to come up to our standards. What labor is concerned about are labor standards. In NAFTA, they were not inside the trade agreement. They were side agreements. They are inside trade agreements in this particular case. So we have 150 guidelines that are required to be in any trade agreement to basically bring other countries up to American standards. And if they don't meet those standards, we have ways of getting our disputes resolved so that we can hold them to account. The key thing is are these countries that we want to trade with going to open their markets to our products just like we already now open to theirs? That's question one. Question two, will they come and work on American standards versus China trying to write the rules, which degrade the standards of trade? And so that's really what's happening here. The other part is there are going to be 3.2 billion people in the middle class in Asia by the year 2030. It's an enormous market for America. And if we want more jobs and better wages, you have to trade. So we have tough teeth in these agreements that TPA requires.
Do you find it ironic, I wonder, that...
Now, in terms of the tough teeth in the agreement, that's the part that I just don't really believe, although there's no way to really know because normal members of the public can't even read the agreement at this point. Of course, or the current status of the agreement, because what's being debated isn't the agreement itself, of course. It's giving the president fast-track authority to finish negotiating and bring it to the Congress and get an up or down vote based on the parameters that Congress has set in the fast-track authority. But only members of Congress can actually go and read the deal, which means we don't really know what's in there. And I am very skeptical about whether the rules are written in favor of workers or in favor of corporations. But you did hear Paul Ryan make that argument that makes a little more sense about the U.S. being able to take leadership rather than China, since China's not part of this partnership, and that our standards for labor and the environment will probably be better than China's, even if they're not all that great. And you can see over on Face the Nation, the new chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, made that same argument that this is really about national security. In the second to last clip on the TPP I'm going to show today here.
Big thing in Congress right now, the trade agreement that's pending. Where do you come down on that?
Look, I believe it is imperative for us, for our national security interests, to quickly pass trade promotion authority, because you can then move on to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and an agreement with our European allies. If you can bring those trade agreements together, you will have 2/3 of the world's economy under the same trade agreement, which allows for fair and free trade, unlike what we have now.
All right, Mr. Chairman, it's certainly nice to...
So, I don't know. That was a pretty short answer. You can let me know what you think about the U.S. versus China argument on the TPP, which, like I said, I still don't actually support it. It's taken me a while to decide because I'm generally in favor of free trade, but I've decided that because it's secret and because of some of the things that have leaked out about it and that have happened in past agreements, I just don't think the rules are written for the workers. It's written for the corporations, and that's in this last clip I'm going to show from the real-time overtime. You can see the whole 14-minute video down with the link in the video description, since it's free on YouTube. They do their overtime as a live event on YouTube, kind of like my live stream. And here you can see Bill Maher actually says something really ignorant at the end, where he thinks that this whole TPP thing may be Obama paying China back for their agreeing to the climate change deal, which seems to like not understand that this is our attempt to take economic dominance from China around the Pacific Rim. But along the way, this guy Charles Murray, who's a conservative who I really don't like, which I'll talk about a little more later, says that he doesn't know what's in the agreement, which is true. And then this progressive activist Heather McGhee makes the argument that I find really persuasive in terms of not supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership in my final TPP clip of the day here.
Well, who is right about the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, Obama or Elizabeth Warren? Yes, the liberal fight between themselves got a little nasty this week. Obama said Elizabeth Warren was just another politician, and he called her Elizabeth. And then Sherrod Brown, the Democratic senator from Ohio, was like, hey, Obama, that's patronizing to use her first name. And Obama was like, hey, I'm not on the rag, you are. I made that last part up. He didn't say that, but it did get a...
Had to paraphrase it. Yeah. Does anybody understand this treaty?
No.
I'm in favor of free trade, but darned if I can figure it out when I read the news stories.
Right.
What's in the thing?
No, so you do read the news story.
Though I stopped after the first paragraph. I said, this is not for me.
It is very arcane. It is a little hard to get into.
But I haven't, the one thing, the few things that almost all economists I know of, and the left and right agree, is free trade is a win-win.
There's no such thing as free trade. Like, that's just a slogan. That's like saying the death tax or something like that.
Clean coal.
Right, exactly. Clean coal.
Trade is a win-win.
Right. Trade is great. We're trading all the time. We're trading barbs, you and I. It's great.
Freely.
It's just what matters is the rules and how you write them, and frankly, who gets to write the rules. And the problem has always been with our version of free trade that corporations and their lobbyists get to write the rules, and it's cost American jobs every single time. And it's not made life better in the manufacturing countries where they're, dying in sweatshops.
So why do you think Obama is so for it?
So I actually think that there's a piece about this, about China, that is geopolitical, that is not about, jobs and economics at home, but this is actually about showing our biggest competitor that we have relationships with these nations in its area. That's a big piece of it that I don't think he can sort of say and lead with, but I think that is a major piece of it.
Maybe he had to make this bargain to get the climate deal with China. Presidents do things behind closed doors we don't know. And sometimes we're glad they do. Anyway, okay.
So I don't know. It seemed to me like in that last clip there, last part of the clip, Bill Maher did not seem to understand that the TPP was U.S. rivalry with China. It wasn't payback for the climate deal with China. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that. You can let me know what you think. But I think I agreed with just about everything Heather McGhee said there, both in terms of the rules not being written for the workers, but for the corporations, and also in terms of this being a geopolitical struggle between the United States and China, which there's something to that in terms of the United States will probably write better environmental and labor rules than China will, making deals with these same countries. So you can let me know what you think about all that and how it all balances out. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is the USA Patriot Act, which is some parts of it are going to expire on June 1st. There's a big controversy over Section 215, which has been used as the justification for bulk phone record collection by the NSA, and the Second Circuit Court of Appeals recently said that was illegal. It was too great an expansion of the power of Section 215, which basically says that you can get an order from a judge that requires no discretion from the judge. As long as you say a few things in your request, the judge has to grant this order to get any tangible thing. And they expanded that to all phone records of all, metadata in every, the two phone numbers and how long they were connected of every phone conversation in the United States, which seems like an overexpansion to me. And so I'm going to show a few quick clips on that. First, this is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Two clips from his interview with Senator Mitch McConnell. He's head of the U.S. Senate, leader of the U.S. Senate, and he seems to want to get a couple-month extension and then get the program reauthorized. First, you can see how he talks about the subject generally in response to George Stephanopoulos' question here.
One area where you still appear to be at odds is over this NSA's telephone surveillance program. It's about to expire in a couple of weeks. The White House backs a bill passed by the House which would have telephone companies keep the records, end the government collection. 196 Republicans in the House voted for that bill. Why are you worried about it?
Well, actually, the bill that passed the House does not require the telephone companies to keep the records. I fear the House-passed bill will basically end the program, and I want to reassure everybody there are plenty of safeguards in this program. Nobody at the NSA is routinely listening into your telephone conversations. In order to intercept any actual discussion on a telephone, they have to go to a court, get a court order. This has been a very important part of our effort to defend the homeland since 9/11. We know that the terrorists overseas are trying to recruit people in our country to commit atrocities in our country. We saw a great example of just what I'm talking about in the Boston Marathon massacre. I don't want us to go dark, in effect, and I'm afraid that the House-passed bill will basically be the end of the program, and we'll not be able to have yet another tool that we need to combat this terrorist threat from overseas.
Your own.
Now, it's kind of weird that he mentioned the Boston Marathon bombing there, because the NSA spying program did not help at all with that. And Rand Paul's going to mention that in a minute in a clip I'm going to show from his interview over on NBC's Meet the Press. But first, I want to show Mitch McConnell responding to a question from George Stephanopoulos specifically about Senator Rand Paul's position and how the getting rid of this program would be a blow for freedom over in this clip.
Your own Senate colleague from Kentucky, Rand Paul, wants to end the program. He put out a tweet this week saying, "I will fight tooth and nail to stop a blanket reauthorization of this attack on our freedoms." How do you respond to that the NSA surveillance program is an attack on our freedoms?
Well, Rand Paul and I agree on most things. We don't agree on this. He doesn't like the House-passed bill either. So we're just in a different place on this. Reasonable people can differ. I think it is an important tool if we're going to have the maximum opportunity to defend our people here at home. And I don't think the House bill does that. I think it basically leads us to the end of the program. What I would rather see, George, is a couple of month extension of the existing program so we can get reassurance that this new bill that passed the House can actually work.
That could face a filibuster.
Well, you know, everybody threatens to filibuster. We'll see what happens. But this is the security of the country we're talking about here. This is no small matter. We see it on display on almost a weekly basis. Earlier in your program, you were talking about the raid that was carried out in Syria. That was over there. What I'm worried about is what happens over here. And this program has been an important tool in helping to protect the homeland.
You mentioned that.
I don't see any evidence that this program has been an important tool. The only one who seems like an important tool to me is Senator Mitch McConnell. No rim shot? Oh, I don't have any rim shot sound effects for you there, but I did want to show one more clip. This is Senator Rand Paul making a much more persuasive argument, I think. This is one of the issues where I think Senator Rand Paul gets it pretty much right, talking specifically about how the Boston Marathon bombing was not stopped by this program and various other very good arguments saying why we shouldn't continue the authority that has been used to do this bulk phone record collection over here.
Let me move to the Patriot Act. We have reauthorizations coming up before June 1st. It's unclear whether it's going to get reauthorized at all before you guys go on your Memorial Day recess. Senator McConnell's talking about a 2-month extension. I know you want to filibuster any Patriot Act extension. Would you even support a 2-month extension?
Well, the court has ruled that the bulk collection of all of our phone records all of the time is illegal. So really it ought to stop. If the president's obeying the law, he should stop it immediately, and we shouldn't be doing this. I don't want to replace it with another system. I really think that we could get along with the Constitution just fine. We did for over 200 years. You can catch terrorists. Judges will grant warrants. In fact, if you look at the history of our country, judges are actually very much, it's not a difficult lift to get a warrant for most activities that you want to be investigated. But the warrant should have someone's name on it. Shouldn't say Verizon, and then we shouldn't collect all of the customers of Verizon. That's a general warrant, and that's one of the things we fought the Revolutionary War over, is that we wanted individualized warrants.
You know, you're so critical of the NSA in your book. I have to ask, would you eliminate it if you were president?
No, I would actually keep the NSA. In fact, I would have the NSA target their activities more and more towards our enemies. I think if you're not spending so much time and money collecting the information of innocent Americans, maybe we could have spent more time knowing that one of the Syryf boys, one of the Boston bombers, had gone back to Chechnya. We didn't know that, even though we'd been tipped off by the Russians. We had communicated, we had interviewed him, and still didn't know that. Same with the recent jihadist from Phoenix that traveled to Texas and the shooting in Garland. We knew him. We had investigated him. We had put him in jail. I want to spend more time on people we have suspicion of and we have probable cause of, and less time on innocent Americans. It distracts us from the job of getting terrorists.
All right, let me go.
So that was an excellent answer from Senator Rand Paul. There are some issues where he says pretty much all the right things, and pretty much everything he said there was right. At least I think it was right. You can let me know what you think. And I think from that answer, it didn't sound like he was going to go along with this 2-month extension that Senator Mitch McConnell was talking about there. And so whether... I guess it's actually possible that parts of the Patriot Act will expire on June 1st and not be reauthorized. That would really be awesome. So that's the last clip I want to show on that topic. But I did want to show a few quick clips, each on an individual topic that I wanted to include in the show before I finish up. And I appreciate all of you who joined me live. I think we're almost up to 100 people. I've been reading along, although it seems to have broken out into an argument about abortion. I don't understand why that is. And if you're watching this as a recorded show and you're wondering what they were all arguing about, I have been trying to put a link down in my video description and also in the video posting comment that's down in the comment section that will lead to my Patreon page, where I've uploaded an attached file that has all of the comments saved because they, for some reason, disappear after the live show. So anyone interested in that can look for that link. It should be up sometime, still on Monday. I'm sorry I haven't really been able to interact that much with the people leaving live comments. I'm actually pretty tired. I did a lot of the preparation of the show in the middle of the night and only got a couple hours sleep. If I seem a little more groggy than usual, I apologize for that. But one thing I didn't want to miss is a comment about Charles Murray, who was on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. Bill Maher had him on as a conservative and didn't say anything about this book he published like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I can't remember exactly, called The Bell Curve, that posited the idea that blacks were, genetically inferior in terms of their intelligence. And I was glad to see that at least one of Bill Maher's guests brought that up. It was rapper Killer Mike, when he was being introduced on the show by Bill Maher, and Bill Maher sort of changed the topic pretty quickly. It's not a very long clip. This was the most anyone talked about Charles Murray's nasty racist past over in this clip.
Let's bring out Mike. He is an activist and hip-hop artist. His latest album is Run the Jewels 2. Michael Render, a.k.a. Killer Mike, is over here. Killer Mike. Come here, brother. Great to see you. This is our panel.
How you doing? How you doing?
All right.
How you doing?
Charles, there's not enough people against you. We wanted to bring out one more. Yeah.
I want to thank him. That book you wrote back in '94 made a lot of my teachers kick our ass. Said you ain't gonna prove this white man right. So we were on.
Oh yes. Right.
Yeah, when he was like genetically black people weren't as smart, and I was like, if the motherfuckers running this country are that brilliant, it's over for us for real. Those Bush genetics got us far.
All right. So, Mike.
I really liked the stuff I saw from Killer Mike. I guess he's a hip-hop artist, not a rap artist. That was my mistake there. I wasn't familiar with Killer Mike before seeing him on the show, but he said a lot of really interesting things. I'm not going to have any more clips from that, although I have one more clip from Ayaan Hirsi Ali's discussion with Bill Maher on Friday that I'm going to get to in a minute, which has to do with Islam and the fight between liberals and Bill Maher on his approach to Islam. But the clip I'm going to show quickly before that is from NBC's Meet the Press, where they talked about something that Bill Maher and atheists have been very successful at, getting more and more people to no longer identify with any religion in the United States. Recent Pew poll, and of course Bill Maher has been using Pew polls about Muslims on his show several times. This is a Pew poll that Bill Maher talked about, but I'm not going to show any clips of Bill Maher talking about it. This is on NBC's Meet the Press yesterday morning here.
Freedom these days, and the rapid rise and increase in the number of Americans who say they aren't religious at all. And in fact, the big political headline is this could be good news for Democrats. Let me show you. The Pew Research Center reported that the number of Americans who are not affiliated with any religion rose almost 7 points from 2007 to 2014, essentially in the age of Obama. These are self-described atheists, agnostics, and those who have no firm affiliation at all, the religious nuns, as Pew is calling them. And they now make up almost a quarter of the population. By the way, that's about equal to the Catholic population in this country. At the same time, the number of Americans who identify with major religions, Catholics, evangelicals, Jews, etc., other Protestant groups, they have declined. The religious nun category is now ranked second in religious self-identification after evangelicals. 7 years ago, they ranked at the very bottom of this list. So why is this good news for Democrats? Well, the religious nuns tend to be young and ideologically liberal. The median age for those affiliated with religions is rising, getting older. It's now about 50. The unaffiliated, this young age, 36 and dropping. And guess what? In 2012, the religious nuns voted overwhelmingly for President Obama. It's another long-term demographic change that's favoring the Democrats. If the country gets less religious, it's bad news for the Republicans. We've talked about the increasing number of non-whites, a demographic shift that is helping Democrats. Well, here is another one, these religious nuns.
That's a really interesting report and an interesting phenomenon. This Pew poll that showed that religious nuns are the second most or highest affiliation after evangelicals, and they're getting up to almost a quarter of the population in the United States. That's really good news and good progress. And the last clip I'm going to show is on a religious topic, has to do with Islam and the fight against radical Islam and Islamic extremism. Someone who's been at the forefront of that fight is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I actually admire in a lot of ways, just like I agree with Bill Maher in a lot of ways. And in this discussion, I don't think I disagreed with anything Ayaan Hirsi Ali said on the program, although she did give, she specifically said she was giving a Disneyfied version of her background, which I think glossed over certain more controversial areas, although also included her female genital mutilation, which didn't seem very Disneyfied to me. I'm not going to show any clips of that. This is the clip of Bill Maher and Ayaan Hirsi Ali talking about how liberals are too apologetic of Muslims, and you can see Bill Maher using polls again to back up his point, which I don't think is really necessarily the best way to go about making these types of arguments, but I'll talk about that a little more after I show the last clip of today's show here.
So I've had, and we know Sharia law is popular in many more countries than you even named. I mean, when I have liberals on this show, one of the big arguments is, well, you're painting with a broad brush. Of course, Saudi Arabia is backward, but what about Indonesia and Turkey and Jordan? Well, I looked up Indonesia and Turkey and Jordan, and well, here are some of the statistics here. In Sharia law, 72% of Indonesians favor it. Jordan, 71%. Stoning of adulterers, Indonesia, 48% popular. Jordan, 67%. Death for leaving Islam, Jordan, 82%. These are their bastions of freedom and democracy. How do we get liberals, and some of them are people I really used to respect, how do we get them to understand that We're the liberals in this debate.
Yes.
The people who are shining a light on oppression and demanding that it will end. How can that not be the liberal cause? What do you say to liberals?
I say to them that the cancer of Islamic extremism is an assault on liberalism, on liberal ideas,
right,
on the idea of the human being as, protect the life of the human being, the freedom of the human, the equality of human beings. That's what it is, an assault on. Islamic extremists divide the world into us and them. And the ones they deem to be them, even if they're pious Muslims, they kill them. They subjugate them. They sell them into slavery. They rape the women, and they destroy art and civilization. And we see it on a daily basis. If you're a liberal and you really, truly believe in the principles of liberalism, you've got to stand up to the challenge of the day, and that is Islamic extremism.
Thank you, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. You're my hero. You know that. Thank you. All right, stay safe.
So that's the last clip, and I don't disagree, like I said, with what Ayaan Hirsi Ali said there, that liberals should oppose all the illiberal ideas that comes from Islamic extremists. The only place that I disagree, as I've said on many shows in the past, is what Bill Maher said about painting with a broad brush. And he didn't, I don't know which polls he was quoting, but to get that information about Indonesia and Jordan, and he sort of skipped back and forth. I don't know if he was cherry picking. There's no way for me to research what he was talking about. I don't know if it was a Pew poll, but I don't even think polls are the best way to really gauge that. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section and what you think about that exchange between Bill Maher and Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I thought it was interesting, and like I said, I think there is some merit to the argument about liberals having to stand up to illiberalism from Islam, just like illiberalism anywhere. But like I said earlier, I only got a little bit of sleep, and I'm very, very tired. I appreciate all of you who joined me for this strangely timed show on a Monday morning so that I could celebrate my wedding anniversary yesterday, and I will be doing the show at right around the regular time, sometime Sunday evening anyway. 6:30 p.m. Pacific time is the usual time. That's Greenwich Mean Time minus 7 hours for those of you who don't know what Pacific time is here in the United States. And I hope to see you all there and all of you watching his recorded show to cover what the corporate media thinks is important in the news this coming week. There should be more information, more political maneuvering on the TPP and this takeover of Ramadi by ISIS. Who knows what the big stories will be by next Sunday. I hope to see you all then. If you want to support my videos through a direct donation or through Patreon, there's a little, if you put the mouse cursor right up there, there should be a little eye you can click on and support my videos, especially so I don't have to depend on the dwindling ad revenue I get from YouTube on this. And I appreciate the 40 people who are my patrons and the occasional people who make those direct donations. It helps me keep doing this, and as a viable use of my time, spending like 12 hours picking out all these clips and broadcasting them for you. I hope you liked it. I enjoy doing it, so I'll be seeing you all again next week and around the internet.